Yesterday is directed by Danny Boyle, is written by Richard Curtis, and stars Himesh Patel, Lily James, Joel Fry, and Ed Sheeran. The premise of this movie is very straightforward, yet is also kind of unique at the same time. Basically, one night there is a mass power outage across the world, and at that moment, struggling singer-songwriter Jack gets hit by a bus and ends up in hospital. However, by the time he wakes up in hospital a couple of days later, apparently no one can remember the Beatles, except for him. So it is now his duty to bring the Beatles' music to this world that doesn't even know who they are. I was pretty excited for this movie for a number of different reasons, but the main one was that it was directed by Danny Boyle, who is one of my favourite directors working today, mainly because you can give him a movie about any topic, and it could be the most uninteresting topic imaginable, and he will always manage to find a way to make it creative and engaging, therefore making that thing that wasn't interesting immediately a whole lot more interesting. I mean, just look at Steve Jobs. The history of Apple might sound interesting to a few people, but the way he goes about directing that film, along with a bit of help from Aaron Sorkin on the screenplay there, manages to make something that shouldn't be interesting a whole lot more interesting. And luckily he manages to do the same here with this movie. The direction, you can tell he's trying his best to make this premise as interesting as it can be. And luckily you've also got Richard Curtis writing this movie as well, who at this point is the master of the rom-com by now. I mean, he's famous for making some of the most iconic romantic comedies of the past 20 or so years. Notting Hill, Love Actually, Four Weddings and a Funeral. The guy knows what he's doing, and here, even though a lot of the tropes he's famous for are very evident in this movie, you can definitely tell that he knows what he's doing, and he knows this formula so well that to the point where, yeah, he can kind of have a little bit of fun with it. And I feel like his writing combined with Danny Boyle's direction is the main thing that keeps this movie going. There are a few points, and I suppose this is my first nitpick, I suppose, but there are a few points, especially as the movie goes on, where the movie feels like it's struggling to keep its singular premise interesting. Like, within the first half of the movie is where the premise really shines. And Jack discovering that he's the only one who knows the Beatles' music, and that whole discovery aspect is what makes that first half as interesting and as fun as it is. But as the movie goes on into its third and final act, it does feel like they are very quickly kind of scraping the barrel in terms of how much they can really stretch out of this one singular premise. There are a few nice twists and turns that they took with it that I really did appreciate, but like I said, there are a few points throughout the movie, and I suppose this is more to do with the writing than it is with the direction, where the premise feels like it's kind of done as much as it can, but yet they're still going further with it, and it's like, yeah, there's only so much you can take a premise like this, and unfortunately you've already found all those ways, so you're just kind of scraping the barrel here. And like I said, that's mainly down to the writing. The writing is not bad by any means. There are some really funny moments in the movie, and the whole main story and how it progresses with the main characters is genuinely quite interesting. But, like I said, it does struggle to carry that premise on throughout its entire runtime at times. And even Danny Boyle's direction, as interesting and as fun and as energetic as it can be, you can tell he's only working with what he has. And there are a few points where he's like, right, how do I make this scene as engaging as I can? And there are a couple of times where his flair of quick editing and bright visuals really do come through, but there are also other times where it's like, right, I'm trying my best here, but there is literally not much I can do with this scene. The performances I thought were all really good across the board. Himesh Patel really surprised the hell out of me, mainly because, and any other UK viewers out there will completely know where I'm coming from here, the last time you would have seen this guy in anything would have been in EastEnders as Tamwa. And that was about, I want to say 10 years ago, maybe even a little bit shorter than that. But yeah, that's all he's, as far as I'm aware, that's all he's, the only other thing he's really done that he's famous for. And he is completely different in this movie. There are a few little traits from that EastEnders character that come over into this, but this is a completely different character. Tamwa was like an awkward, nerdy person, whereas Jack in this movie is a little bit more confident, but yet still doesn't know what to say at certain times, therefore carrying some of the traits of Tamwa over. And I think he did a really good job here, not just with the performance, but with also the singing as well, and he really does a lot of these Beatles songs justice. Lily James is as good as she usually is, and if anything, I do actually think she gives the best performance in the movie, because if it wasn't for her investment and her engagement in that character, then I don't think the main relationship between her and Jack would work as well as it does in the movie. You also have Joel Fry, who is kind of the comic relief in the movie, but he does it in a way that feels very natural and doesn't feel forced, and I really liked him in this movie, and I do think he should get a lot more roles in films like this, because as far as I'm aware, he's only really notable on UK TV, and this movie proves that he should really get a lot more roles like this in bigger movies. Ed Sheeran is in the movie a lot more than I thought he was going to be. I thought he was basically going to be a glorified cameo, but he's actually a legitimate character in the movie that appears in multiple scenes, and he's not bad. His acting can be a bit wooden and crap at times, but there are other moments where you can see he's genuinely trying, and he's actually not that bad. Also, and this one might seem really obvious, but the music in the movie is really good. But that being said, it's the Beatles. Of course it's going to be good. What they are able to do with the Beatles' music in this movie is really interesting, and one thing I really appreciated about this film is that, considering that it's a film about the Beatles' music, but not about the Beatles themselves, is that it luckily never feels self-indulgent. Because that's the one worry I had about this film. Yeah, I realise it's about the Beatles, but are they going to be kind of smacking you over the head with their music to the point where it's like, there's no one else other than the Beatles? And that's the one thing I was worried about. But luckily this movie doesn't make it feel like that. Yeah, it makes it out that the Beatles' music is important in history, and so rightly, their music is defining for an entire era and generation. But luckily, it doesn't smack you over the head with it as much as you'd think, and the movie goes about it in a pretty charming way, which makes it a lot more palatable and doesn't make it feel as self-indulgent as you would think, which I thought was a really nice touch. The only other issue I have with this movie, and this is kind of, again, reminiscent of the previous nitpick that I had, is that the pacing can feel a bit all over the place at times. Like, you'll have a few scenes that flow really nicely, but then you'll have this other scene that kind of just grounds to a halt, and then another scene that goes really fast. And yeah, I don't quite know which is more to blame for that, the direction or the writing, or even the editing at this point. But yeah, I just thought that was something that kind of bugged me as it went on. It's not a massive issue, it's just something that I noticed. In the end, I'm going to give Yesterday a 7 out of 10. Definitely could have been a bit better, but that being said, there's only so far you can take a premise like this until it starts to get old quickly. Luckily, the movie is fun and engaging and quite sweet as well for what it is, and I think it's just a nice change of pace to see a movie that's this happy and uplifting for once, rather than something that's a bit dark or depressing and gruesome. And I just thought it was a really nice change for that. So guys, that was my review of Yesterday. If you enjoyed the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye!